Hello and welcome to Advancing Gut Testing. What's new in the Gut Zoomer? My name is Adair Anderson. I am the product marketing educator here at Vibrant and just want to go over some quick housekeeping items before we get started. Attendees are in listen only mode. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them as a comment. There will be time at the end for Q&A. Also, yes, this webinar is being recorded and you will get a copy of the recording and the slides after the webinar ends. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Dan Kalish. Dr. Kalish is the founder of the Kalish Institute of Functional Medicine and is a leading authority in functional medicine and longevity-focused care. With over 30 years of clinical experience, he has trained more than 10,000 practitioners globally in lab interpretation, personalized protocol design, and personalized protocol design. The Kalish Institute specializes in teaching evidence-based root cause medicine with an emphasis on optimizing systems that drive healthy aging. In 2025, Dr. Kalish launched the Kalish Institute's longevity certification program, equipping clinicians with the tools to extend health span through advanced diagnostics and targeted interventions. His mission is to empower practitioners to deliver transformative longevity-centered patient care. Take it away, Dr. Kalish.
Oh, thank you so much, Adair, for putting this on, and thank you to Vibrant for hosting this. I'm super excited here because there is a new and updated Gut Zoomer. It doesn't get better in functional medicine than when a lab company with the expertise and intelligence and team members of Vibrant creates a new test for us clinicians. And so I've been in the lab industry for a long time. I've worked in lab companies since, not to date myself, but since 1995. And as a practitioner, we are completely dependent on lab companies. And so we want these lab companies to up level and upgrade and improve their product because that allows us to improve our delivery of care. And so this is a really major breakthrough when a company puts together an updated test. So it's just important to talk about, important to learn about what are all the new features of the test and being able to kind of coordinate that with your lab interpretation and patient program design skills. That's really the goal of today's session. And part of what's really great about this new test, and I think extremely innovative, is the patient engagement experience and the ability for you to use the actual test report as a patient communication tool. That is super, super helpful. It helps the patient because they can visually see what you're talking about and understand it. And it's way more impactful to the patient to see what's going on in the picture than for you to show them, just a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper. It doesn't really have much meaning to people. Um, we're also going to talk about the Vibrant Academy launch in a few minutes, and we'll go over that as well. Okay. So it's going to be a little action-packed session here. We'll have time for questions at the end. So as mentioned, I am Dr. Dan Kalish. I've been doing this online teaching since 2006, worked with a lot of people. One of the highlights of my career was we did a research project with the Mayo Clinic, specifically on GI lab analysis. And that was a sort of a breakthrough moment in my experience to actually see how well people respond in a more measured and calculated and tracked way than we can usually do in our practice. To see that in a research study setting was pretty profound. And these protocols work. It's sort of the bottom line of what the Mayo Clinic study showed. And I've been in practice forever too, IFM certified, all that good stuff. So why the gut health testing matters in the first place and why you want to take it up a notch is the number one thing, and this is the hardest thing to impress upon all of us, is that it's not really about GI symptoms. I mean, of course, you can test and correct GI symptoms with a GI test, but the GI tract is the foundation for the entire system's health, your whole body's health, your nervous system, your heart, everything is dependent on the GI tract. And this is an ancient naturopathic idea. It's not a new concept, but it's being borne out by all the research that's happening now in the microbiome and all the research that's happening with longevity. In fact, on the longevity folks, that hallmarks of longevity paper that was put out in 2013, 10 years later, 2023, they updated it. And one of the few things they added, and these are the top scientists in the world, and this is in the top journal in the world, right? One of the few things they added was dysbiosis as a new indicator for longevity. That's a big deal. when you get the top scientists in the top journal, saying, okay, now dysbiosis is on our longevity list. So this is in the news, it's in the scientific community, and we in functional medicine have been doing this stuff, for decades. So it's time for us to kind of step up and get more involved in the science part of this, because the science is on our side now in a way that it wasn't in the past. Um, Again, it trips people up, but GI workups reduce oxidative stress. They improve mitochondrial function, and those are two of the key, if not the key elements in any longevity program. And so it doesn't make sense to a lot of practitioners. It doesn't make sense to a lot of patients that we want you to do this GI test, this gut zoomer test, even though you have no gut symptoms. We want to do this as a way to help understand your oxidative stress load and your mitochondrial function. It's so abstract. And what we're going to talk about a little bit today, and certainly what's talked about more in the different vibrant educational offerings, is how the gut ties back to oxidative stress and mitochondrial function. And once you make that connection, then it's pretty easy for the patient to understand that they should understand what's going on with their microbiome. The GI health matters via the gut's connection to hormones, to immune function, to detoxification, to inflammation, and most especially to your brain. So, patients with immune problems, hormone problems, detox related issues who are inflamed, patients with cognitive issues, they all need to be screened for the gut, unrelated to whether they have gut symptoms or not. In fact, we have a doctor in our class. It's a medical doctor, and he has like 5 clinics throughout the Western states. He's a very prominent guy. I won't mention his name. Um, and he's in the middle of one of my mentorship programs, and he developed this really serious and potentially life-threatening skin condition just out of the blue. He's talking about it in class. I'm like, I have no idea what to do about that. That sounds really serious. And just out of absolute desperation, he did a GI test. And it turned out he had GI infections, and he cleared the GI infections. And this strange and unusual and potentially life threatening skin problem went away. And we talked about it a lot in class because it's so counterintuitive that you should do a GI test when there's no GI symptoms, that it takes like a sudden conversion experience like that for people to get it. But hopefully you guys can get it even before you have any serious problem with your health or your patient's problems, right? You can just get this concept that the gut has to be tested with everybody. Corollary of that is that now we've got you doing the gut testing, right? Now you're excited about it. Then the question is, well, what's the effectiveness of the protocol? And the protocol that you're going to set up and design is completely dependent on the accuracy and the depth of the lab data. And there's lots of problems with traditional stool tests. There's been problems with using culture versus PCR. We'll talk about that in detail in a minute. There's problems with markers being siloed or kind of isolated and not connected back to the main problem, which is the systems of the body, not just the gut. There's a problem that a lot of the lab test reports just are a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper, and they're just not that informative. And it's really difficult for both practitioners and patients to understand what's going on because people kind of glaze over when they just see page after page that's not, graphically relevant to them. They just, the brain doesn't accept that information so easily. And so the gut zoomer now is working to overcome all of these issues. Functional, and we'll talk a lot about that in a minute when we look at the tech stuff. Interconnected, so you can see this is causing that, but it's related to this, and there's visuals for that. Clinically actionable, so they actually have descriptions of what you should do. Now, I'm a strong advocate for having a mentor and having, a senior practitioner that's been doing this for a long time that's educating you. But in the meantime, and in addition to that, seeing what's on these lab reports and then seeing what the actions are is a really great starting point for those of you that are just learning how to interpret these labs. Okay. And then, and I think this is the most important part, is the ease of understanding as to the gut's role in overall health, because that's the biggest problem that we face in functional medicine is the struggle to explain why the gut matters for these immune problems and neurological problems and skin problems, like I mentioned, right? That it's very difficult for patients and practitioners to get their minds around that. And hopefully this test is going to help you kind of overcome that block. So polymerase chain reaction, real-time PCR. And in the early 1980s, PCR was invented by this guy named Kerry Mullins, who's quite a character and a very close family member of mine. My brother-in-law was the attorney, the patent attorney that was involved in all of this. So I've known about PCR since when it was first invented, and boy, did it take off. It became a worldwide phenomenon. It's an incredible technology. What they do and why it's so unique and what Dr. Mullen's breakthrough was, by the way, he got the Nobel Prize for this in 1993. A decade after he invented this, he got the Nobel Prize. So this is like a really big deal worldwide, globally, scientifically, is to conceptualize even that you can take a sample, in this case, a stool sample, and figure out what's in it by amplifying the DNA. And imagine what a difference this is. Okay, prior to PCR, how did we figure these things out? Primarily by looking under a microscope. Okay, so looking under a microscope and trying to find something is really, really hard because there's a human being that's attached to that microscope and they have to be able to see this thing. All of a sudden, with PCR, you're able to detect something at the level of DNA. It's not a human being, and it's not the whole organism you need to see. Just a fraction of the organism needs to be present for them to be able to find a positive on this. And as we all know, if anyone's ever watched like a crime show on TV, you know that DNA testing is extremely accurate because they'll find the DNA in the bathroom that someone leaves a hair behind or a drop of blood and they run it through the crime lab and that's the DNA of this individual. And people go to jail for the rest of their lives based on DNA. It's a highly accurate way to find things. Highly accurate. You can't really have a mistake with it in a sense, because if you see the DNA of the organism present, you know that the organism is physically there. Okay. And major, major breakthrough for all. I'm old enough to have been around before PCR was a part of functional medicine testing. And the revolution that's happened from PCR is it's hard to wrap your mind around how much this has improved our ability to detect things. So there's guts, commensals, and gut pathogens. So obviously PCR is going to find more infections, which is one of the most important things that we do in a functional medicine screening is find out if the patient's sick, if they have an infection. But they also, in addition to that, have PCR for the commensals. So Vibrant uses a couple of different testing techniques. They target these two different regions called 16S and 23S. A lot of companies only do the 16S, and so they're not going to be nearly as accurate as Vibrant would be. And so it's more complex the way they do it, but far more accurate. And so in terms of commensal bacteria, and the way that people used to screen for both of these organisms pre-PCR was with a culture. So you take a stool sample, you put it in a culture. Anyone who took high school biology knows about this, and you grow it out in the petri dish. You remember? And you would go back the next day or a week later and you see, oh, all these things have grown. But clearly, when you're doing culture, it's happening in an oxygen-rich environment. If it's happening on this planet, there's a lot of oxygen around. And so what we're interested in primarily with the commensals is what's happening in the large intestine, which is anaerobic. There's no oxygen there. And so if you want to get an accurate assessment about what's happening in the person's large intestine with their microbiome, which is what we want, then having oxygen in the mix is going to really screw things up. And so PCR was a major breakthrough because it allowed for the identification of the DNA of these organisms to be present. So you're getting an exact replica of what's actually happening in the intestinal tract versus a oxygen contaminated version of that. Okay, so this is another great scientific breakthrough. They also use ELISA technology, which is used by many different labs, but it's still kind of a complicated thing that you need to learn how to do accurately. And they have another super special thing that nobody else has. And I've seen these at the lab, and it's incredible technology with these proprietary protein microarrays. And I don't know if you ever get the chance to do a lab tour, if you're ever able to see what the actual technology behind this is pretty incredible. And no one else has this. So they're doing this at what would you say, like an innovative cutting edge level of science, which is really quite remarkable. And they're able to do things at a speed and accuracy level that other labs simply can't do because they don't have the technology developed yet. They also have my favorite, personal favorite, LCMS machines, liquid chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry machines. And they have a lot of them. It's like a field of them. It's like field of dreams for mass spec people. But these are super important because you can run bile acids, short chain fatty acids, fecal fats. You can run organic acids on these. Um, a whole bunch of different very important tests are done on these types of machines. And having a robust system that does this accurately is not the easiest thing in the world to set up, just so you know. You have to have some seriously focused human beings to set up and run these machines accurately. And I can personally attest to the fact that these folks have that. And also the newer technology and newer machines helps too. Okay. All right. So that's a basic, update on the technology. And we want this, right? Because clinicians are dependent on the accuracy of these labs, and we want the newest and latest technology so we can get the best results with our patients. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about the test itself, about the test format. And we're going to look at a whole bunch of examples in a second, but just to introduce it, we're going to talk about the redesign report and how it's organized by clinical domains. Okay, so for clinicians, this should be much more helpful. Digestion, inflammation, immunity, detox, infection. So you have a general sense of how to tie the test back to what the patients are complaining about, what you're working on. They have these new visual overlays that map the symptoms to the relevant markers, which is pretty incredible. And then they have protocol suggestions we'll look at and a bunch of other commentary things. So let's look at a few of these examples here. I'll show you. Um, and this one is amazing. I mean, this maybe is not the best thing to tell you guys, but I spent like 20 minutes looking at this picture the other day. It's so cool because it visualizes everything in one place. All right. So I'm going to spend a few minutes going over this because it's pretty important. And conceptually, because you can use this, this is like the ultimate patient education tool here. Okay. So what they've done is they've got the markers over here. You can see the markers, lysozymes, the calprotectin, all that over here. And then they've got it color coded. So obviously red is bad, yellowy orange is, bad, but not quite as bad. And if it's blank, then it's okay. Okay. So yellowy orange is warning, warning, it's not doing well. Red is extra bad. But then the diagram over on your right is color coded to match the markers. So this is printed out custom or, produced graphically custom per patient per lab. So you can see the beta defensin 2 is circled in red there, highlighted in red on the outer border. That's the marker that's positive over on the left. You can see the eosinophil protein X is highlighted in red in a red box. That marker is elevated over here. So it turns the graphic image into a custom description of what's going on in your patient's gut. That's pretty amazing. Okay. And then the next level up, that's not enough. The next level up is like, okay, well, what does that really mean? It also ties that marker back to where it relates to the gut and what it means. So, for example, if you look at, well, any of these really, let's start at the bottom and go up. So, if you look at parasites and allergens, boom, you follow the eosinophil path up and you see, oh, that's related to eosinophil protein X. So, you can go back the other way as well. Oh, eosinophil protein X is elevated. I'm going to go down here and talk to my patient about food allergies and about the potential for parasitic infections. Right? So you can see not only the marker and if it's elevated in that patient, but some of the causative issues that you're going to want to bring up. Maybe you see this, maybe you want to order a food allergy test because you see that this mark, and there's your little cue, that you want to do that. So each of these markers has that feature, and you can study this. You can use it as a patient education tool, and it's customized with each report to that patient's individual markers, which is pretty phenomenal. And believe me, I spent, years, like, drawing stuff, like and you don't wanna see my drawings. My grandfather, Max Kalish, was a very amazing artist in the 20s and 30s, but I cannot draw at all. And so trying to draw the gut lining, and then this is over there, and it's just junky, and it's just not a good patient experience. But the problem with a lot of images is that it's not directly related to the patient because you have all this gobbledygook. But in this case, you've got the highlights of what matters to that patient in a graphic interface that's easy to understand with the causative stuff at the bottom and the markers at the top. I don't think you could get a better design than this. And having trying to draw this stuff all these years, I can say that you guys can have a much better patient experience than my patients ever did. Okay. So here's another example of what we're doing, gut metabolites. So you can see the estrogen in the upper left-hand corner going into the liver. Your body's trying to get rid of the estrogen, right? It's clearing it out through these different detoxification pathways called COMT and all that. And then it's going into this form and then down to this form, and then they're showing it now in the gut. So when beta glucuronidase goes high, what's happening is that estrogen is being recirculated back into the bloodstream. Okay, and it's again showing this whole path. So if you have a high beta glucuronidase case, and again, it's the same thing where the markers that are elevated will be highlighted in red or yellow or yellowy orange. If you had a high beta glucuronidase, you can use this as a description to explain to the patient, okay, let me tell you what's happening. You've got estrogen that you produced. It went to your liver to get rid of it, to break it down. And then because your beta glucuronidase is high, you've got a problem now with the estrogen recirculating. This is something we call estrogen dominance. What we should probably do your hormone zoomer test next so we can see what's going on with the estrogen side of this. Okay. And then they have the same thing for probably my favorite of all this, which are the short chain fatty acids. So complex carbs in your diet, you should be eating, high fiber foods. From that, you're going to make short chain fatty acids through the fermentation process. And we're looking at butyrate and propionate in this particular example as having a problem. Okay. And so again, you have the graphic description and the ability to map to that individual patient what's going on. And then you can take the treatment sequence from this. I mean, it's pretty easy. Once they see all this, you say, oh, your beta glucuronidase is high. We just explained the estrogens are recirculating. I think you need something like calcium D-glucarate to start to clear this from your liver so you can get this out of your body. And because the beta glucuronidase elevates in relation to gut bacterial problems, we want to work on improving your gut health. And same for butyrate and short chain fatty acid issues. You talk about the treatment, which would be, some increasing fiber containing foods and getting the microbiome sorted out, polyphenols and fiber and whatnot. And, maybe even prescribing butyrate if it's appropriate for that person. Okay. So then we have the clinical reference chart. So I'll just go through a few of these because we don't have endless time here. But you can see in this case, again, they highlight in the red box there what's going on with this particular patient. So you have the general reference chart, but then it's customized so that you can focus on the areas that matter. In this case, they're looking at bile acids, right? And implying that if you have a problem with bile acids, then you could potentially have elevated gut inflammation, bowel discomfort, etc. Over here, you can see butyrate. If there's a problem with butyrate, there's some general, concepts about you've got gastric discomfort, maybe some brain fog. Butyrate is a stimulator of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So when people are low in butyrate, they can have problems with their brain. So it helps kind of tie back all the clinical stuff so you can have an articulate conversation with your patient. And then they have suggestions on what to actually do, which is next level, right? So you don't have to ponder that for everybody. And it gives you a head start. Again, this is not going to be your whole treatment plan, but it gives you a place to start. So oh, okay, in the case of this particular marker being out of balance, I may consider these different potential treatment options, including lifestyle interventions as well as supplements, herbs, those kinds of things. Okay. Then the Gut Zoomer has new markers they've added as well, and several of them that we'll talk about here. Yeah, these two in general are related to mood and metabolism. Okay. And there's a lot of research on this I've been reading lately. It's pretty interesting. If you have the time, you can Google these and look at some of the information that's out there about how impactful the gut microbiome is in regulating our metabolic health and our mood. And there's more and more research coming out. It just shows more and more how important this is. There's another organism that's been added, Hafnia, metabolic gatekeeper, it's being called now. And this one modulates how we feel about food, whether we feel full or not, through these neuropeptides that are related to appetite regulation. And so, believe it or not, microorganisms in your gut help your body and brain understand how much you should eat. You know, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. It seems like these microbiome organisms have a little too much control over our brain. Like the thought that there's a bunch of these organisms out there, like this one and these two guys, that are telling me whether I should eat or not. I mean, that's a little creepy and weird, but it's the truth to it. And if you question the research on this, you should read the research first. But if you question the research on this, I give you a simple clinical tip you can do on your own. It'll cost you like $10 and you could do it tomorrow. If you have an Amazon account, just go to Amazon and order some psyllium fiber. Okay. And take a tablespoon or two of it, depending on how healthy you are, once or twice a day for a few days in a row and see what the heck that does to your feeling of what you should eat. So, just something as simple as fiber, which is going to obviously completely change all the commensal bacteria because that's their food supply. And it's not just that the fiber is filling you up because, your tummy's full of all this fiber. It's the effect that the fiber has on the microbiome, which is back in this slide here with the short chain fatty acids that we were talking about, right? Those short chain fatty acids are a byproduct of people eating dietary fiber. And then all the consequences that come from that in relation to things like butyrate and all these appetite mechanisms in the brain and body are just completely tied back to these organisms. It's a little strange, but it seems to be the truth of it all. And what I think the flip side of it is if your gut is screwed up, you're going to be hungry all the time and you're going to overeat. And you're going to not overeat broccoli. Nobody overeats broccoli. You're going to overeat really unhealthy foods, and it's going to make you overweight and feel sluggish and bad. And if your microbiome is in great shape, we have this guy we call Farmer John because his name is John and he's a farmer and he has this amazing farm. It's a couple hours from our house, but he comes every Saturday to our neighborhood and sells his vegetables. And I crave like that guy's cucumbers. And I know that sounds strange, but they're so good. But if your microbiome is balanced because you're eating healthy food, your appetite changes and what makes you feel satiated changes to be healthy food. It's just the way that the microbiome works. But if you disrupt the microbiome and you're eating a lot of sugar, and I'll tell you, if I eat ice cream 3 days in a row, I'm going to crave ice cream for months because you get the sugar going, you get the yeast and fungal overgrowth going, you completely screw up the healthy organisms, and then all of a sudden, your sense of what you want to eat and should eat changes, and not in a good way, right? You're not craving broccoli when you eat ice cream. But if you eat Farmer John's food, you start to crave his vegetables, and what an amazing thing that is. And this is what I'm the most interested in, honestly, is to get the better patient outcomes. Because my whole career these days in teaching is predicated on training practitioners to have super successful functional medicine practices. And in order to do that, you need to have really great patient outcomes, and then you're gonna get referrals, and your practice will naturally grow and prosper. And so, there's nothing more important than a GI health assessment in order to accomplish this. And again, I've been working with labs and in labs since the mid 1990s. And it's frustrating every decade that the lab detection techniques lag behind what we as clinicians need to get the best results. And I feel like we're starting to catch up now, and that Vibrant is at the cutting edge of that, absolutely, in their technology. And so we need to, as a practitioner community, support the labs that are offering these new things by ordering these tests and getting people better. This is like a cycle that we want to fulfill. They've also got, and this is sort of my personal interest, is in GI pathogens. Maybe, well, I'm interested in the microbiome more, but this is like my second main interest is in pathogens. And it's really a bummer when you know the patient has a pathogen and you can't find it. That's like depressing and it happens a lot. And so the new Gut Zoomer has these expanded uh, test techniques for hard to detect GI bugs like C. difficile, some forms of candida, norovirus. So you're going to get a higher recovery rate on your pathogens, which is pretty important because when you miss one, it's extremely frustrating. Patients don't get better. And, everybody's just a little bit upset. All right. So now let's talk about this section of the test. We have a few markers. We're not going to go over everything in detail, but I'm talk a little bit about lipopolysaccharides, antibodies, the tissue transglutaminase test, and the uh, markers that are related to predictive autoimmunity. So there's a marker called ACSA, and there's this other one, tissue transglutaminase. And they are markers of early detection that we can use to detect the early signs of autoimmunity, which is pretty amazing because autoimmunity is on the rise, as you know. If you look at the research on the increased levels of autoimmunity, it's really about as frightening as anything else you could imagine. And so the earlier you can detect autoimmunity in any of your cases, the better. And it's sad when it's gone to the point where someone has, an advanced case of lupus, and you could have intervened if you had the right lab technology, maybe 10 or 15 years prior. So we wanna, as much as possible, screen people as early as possible to make sure that we detect what's going on. And if you're having the mindset of like a wellness or longevity practice and you're not waiting until people are really sick to test them, then it's important that you can get markers that are going to show up earlier in the process, right? That you're not just waiting until the disease is in its full blown state. So these markers are really helpful for that purpose. Um, and then the LPS marker. So LPS is this bacterial toxin, endotoxin, and it triggers sort of notoriously all these inflammatory pathways. And as soon as you get inflammation going, you got problems with oxidative stress. As soon as you get inflammation going, you've got problems with insulin resistance. As soon as you get inflammation going, you've got problems with longevity. So I think of it as like there's maybe like 3 or 4 of these factors that completely overlap. Let's say 3 at least: inflammation, insulin resistance, and oxidative stress in terms of longevity and how healthy your cells are. So when we talk about longevity, I'm like, longevity of what? Well, longevity of your cell is like where we want to start, or your cells, all your cells. And if cells are exposed to a lot of inflammation or a lot of oxidative stress, or if you're insulin resistant, then your cells are going to be damaged, prematurely, and you're going to go through an aging process, which you shouldn't be doing at whatever age you're at. Okay. And so having a grip on where the inflammation is coming from and how bad it is and having a way to track it and mark it over time is super important. And I think if you're thinking about GI testing and how it fits into this bigger picture of longevity, you read all the papers and it gets pretty confusing, but you can boil it down for patients to a couple of simple things, I think: oxidative stress, inflammation, insulin resistance, and mitochondrial dysfunction. I mean, like 3 or 4 things. And if you dial in and reduce the inflammation in the gut, that's going to reduce systemic inflammation throughout the body. If you get that figured out, the person's going to become less insulin resistant. And as we just mentioned a minute ago, there's a whole bunch of these little gut bugs that relate to metabolic function, how your body's using insulin and glucose. And if you get the oxidative stress load down and you get the mitochondria figured out, all of that ties into gut function, because the gut often for a lot of our patients is one of the major sources of uh, inflammation and tissue damage. Okay. They also have these other gut metabolites, which are wonderful. These are the ones that we talked about a lot. Okay. And then let's get on to the gut zoomer as a new clinical standard. Okay. Number one, new markers and new techniques, right? And some proprietary techniques that they've developed with their own in-house scientists, like those microarrays that I was talking about. It's pretty phenomenal when a lab company actually literally creates a whole new technology. Well, they have this other thing that's really cool in the lab. Um, I don't know if this is going to change your clinical world, but it's like super cool. If you've ever been in a lab company where they do stool testing, it is not a pleasant process. And in fact, one of the labs that I toured a couple years ago, I was with some of my team members and they were turning blue and about to throw up, okay? Because it smells really bad and it's disgusting. You walk into the Vibrant stool testing facility thing, and it's like, "What's going on in here? Stool testing." I couldn't tell. It didn't smell. I'm thinking, "Wow, this isn't like any other lab I've ever been." And then the other thing that's even more mind-blowing is that there's like a robot doing everything. It's not like a bunch of people working in a sewage treatment plant smell environment. They've got this robot, and I'm like, "What's that thing?" And they're like, "Yeah, we designed this robot to do this." Okay? Talk about high tech. You know, if you look at it, I mean, if you walk into a lab and you see all these human beings walking around, it smells like a sewage treatment plant. They're handling stool samples, and you have the vision to clean this up literally. So there's like no smell and there's no human beings. There's like robots doing everything. That just gives you the mindset of the people at Vibrant. They're like, oh, that's a problem. Let's fix that. How are we going to fix that? Let's just throw a bunch of robot engineers in the room and get them to make this thing. All right. Anyway, but it sort of speaks to the way that these people think. They think technology, they think new, they think innovation, they think let's make this better. Even for their staff and team members that work in the lab, right? Like you guys would never even know about that robot if I hadn't just said that. Okay, so what else? Improve reporting, which we've looked at, the cool images and how it's all color coded. And you can tie that back to patients. And then I think this is one of the more important things is the connection between the GI health and inflammation, oxidative stress, insulin resistance, and being able to understand and explain to patients that you want to have a bigger conception of what the microbiome and the GI tract is all about. It's not just about gut symptoms and gut problems. Really, really important to get that. So you can use the new report suggestions, that suggestion section I showed you at the point of care. So you can develop personalized programs, pretty easy to do. It's all color coded for you. And they even tell you the types of products that you can use. And these are going to be protocols that are impactful. You can do that right away. You don't even need to take, a fancy class. Although I think most of you should, or all of you really should get as educated about this as you can. But the idea is that you can get started in the beginning with your first couple of tests with a general understanding of what you should do. And for a lot of time, these tests have been intimidating to people, and people are afraid to order them or are not comfortable ordering them because they don't know how to interpret them. And I think Vibrant has really stripped away a lot of those barriers for us to be able to do that. Uh, Graphics, formatting, connecting the dots for us, especially for the folks without GI complaints. Then, in terms of application, for interpretation shortcuts, I really am a strong advocate of using a simple clinical model. And this is how I explain it to patients. I say, look, we're going to think of this test. Oh my gosh, it's so long. There's so many things. Yeah. We're going to think of just really three things here that we want to investigate: your microbiome, how well are your GI organs working, and are there any infections or pathogens? And you can organize a whole complicated program and a very complex test with a ton of data, like the Vibrant Gut Zoomer, around these three ideas. Is the microbiome diverse? Is it healthy? Which organisms are off? Which ones aren't? What's happening with that? What's happening with the GI organs? There's not that many GI organs, right? So pancreas, is it making enzymes? The gallbladder, is it making bile? The small intestine, large intestine, do you have gut immunity? Do you have leaky gut? Do you have gut inflammation? So making sure the organs are in great shape. And then are there any infections? So these three areas, and then you just treat the three areas. Treat the microbiome if needed, prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, butyrate, whatever you want, right? Treat the GI organs as needed. You may want to do some SIG-A boosting with an IgG product or some, pancreatic enzymes or gallbladder support if they have problems there. And then if there's a pathogen that's bad enough, you want to kill it. So you don't have to use that clinical model. I think it's a great one, and but I've seen many others. But you want one that's short and succinct so you can explain the lab test to the patient and so you can understand it too. You can glance at the test and say, microbiome, good or bad, GI organs, okay or not, is there a pathogen? And then you can get into the weeds after that, but you have a bigger picture view of all of that. And then you can use all these visuals and overlay guides so you can get into the best treatment sequences once you have this bigger picture view. And by the way, these are sequential, right? So when the microbiome is thrown off for long enough, it affects the GI organs. When the GI organs are impacted and the immune response in the gut is weak and the mucosal lining in the gut is weak, you don't even have a lot of mucus in the gut, then you develop problems with pathogens. So it's sequential. It goes from microbiome, things get worse, the organs are involved, things get really bad, you have a pathogen problem. And then, uh, and this is kind of a hard thing. Most of the people that I train are pretty new to functional medicine, like it's their first 3 to 5 years of doing this kind of work. And so I think Vibrant has positioned the test in a way that those folks can get their mind around it and use it and develop protocols that are impactful because they have all these suggestions and hints and a kind of a no-brainer color-coded way of looking at the test. And then for advanced practitioners, if you really care about the akkermansia level, you can look it up. It's in there. There's a marker. It'll say akkermansia. You can see, oh, you got this much akkermansia. You know, so if you are at the level of sophistication where you care about individual microorganisms and commensals and whatnot, all that information is there. But then you have the summaries and the guides if you're not at that level yet. And then enhancing patient engagement. So the worst thing in the world is when you have a lab test report and you're excited about it, and the patient is just like sitting there, glazed eyed, and they're just like not following what you're saying. And I spent my first few years in practice explaining complex lab data to patients and not noticing that they were glazing over and spacing out and couldn't follow what I was saying. And then at some point, I don't know what got me to realize that I needed to change things, but the whole point of doing the test is to get the patient better. And if they don't understand what's happening, it's hard to convince them to do things. So the more that you have these visuals and the more patient understanding that you develop through that lab report session, The more they understand this, the more they're compliant they're going to be. And I'm telling you, if you really explain this well, you'll have 95% of your patients doing everything that you want. And if you don't explain this well, you'll probably have like 30% of people doing what you want, and 70% are going to go, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't even understand that, you know? So the ability to communicate with people, with you, with your coaches, with your nutritionist, with your whole team, that ability of that group to communicate with patients is going to make or break the practice. I mean, you can have all this amazing lab data and have every PCR thing on the planet, and it's not going to work if you can't communicate it well. So I think one of the key things about the new lab report is that it makes that process easier. So and then none of this exists in a vacuum. We're talking about gut for 40 minutes now, but really, I always think of the body in systems and try to keep it as simple as possible. You can have hormones and gut and detoxification systems. You can make it more complex if you want. But when you're looking at the gut and you see that there's problems, you're always going to have other systems that you need to test. So, for example, if the beta glucuronidase is elevated on the gut zoomer, you have to do the hormone zoomer and see what's going on with the estrogen, or it's like negligent if you don't. Because you've got a marker there that shows they're recycling estrogen. You better go over and see if that's causing a bigger problem than you know about or not. If you see a problem with inflammation and food reactions, then you better do a wheat zoomer and figure out exactly what's going on, what's generating the food reactions and permeability issues from a food perspective. If you have a problem with, like, let's say, gallbladder issues, and they're not absorbing fat soluble nutrients very well, then maybe you should think about doing a nutritional screening tool like the micronutrient panel. And if you see specifically, let's say you get worried about fat soluble antioxidants being depleted, then all of a sudden now you have to do the oxidative stress test and understand a little bit more about their toxin profile. And you're every single case you have that's got a major gut problem will have a hormone and food and micronutrient and toxin and oxidative stress component to it. So sometimes it's easier in the beginning to learn these tests one at a time, but eventually you want to be able to juggle a whole series of tests together. And in my systems that I teach for most of my classes, it's 3 body systems just to keep it easy, right? It's hormones, GI, and GI would include the wheat zoomer and the gut zoomer, hormones, GI, and then, detoxification, which would include all the things like total toxins and oxidative stress and that. So in the classes that I teach, the more advanced courses that I teach, everybody is doing every test on every patient. They're doing a hormone analysis, they're doing a GI workup, and they're doing micronutrients and toxins all together. And once you get to that level and you're having all these tests coming in at the same time, then it's like mastery, and you'll see these interconnections. In the beginning, if you're just learning, it is easier to learn one test at a time, but I also want you all to know that when you get advanced, you're gonna be running, ordering a whole series of panels on every patient because that's just what makes the most sense. So I'm gonna just talk a little bit about the Vibrant Academy. It's a class that was set up by Vibrant, and I contributed module 1 and module 6 very proudly to this. So if you do join the Vibrant Academy, you'll hear quite a bit about more about me speaking on this. It's a 6 module course, and it's great. It's not great because I did it. I'm not like saying I'm great. It's just great because it's a great class. It was a great idea. I just followed the instructions and participated. And Adair will talk more about this in a minute. Okay. But it's got a really great broad spectrum analysis of what you can be doing with the gut zoomer test results and figuring out the science behind this and some interpretation skills and understanding how to deal with patient objections and get engagement to be better and a bunch of case-based protocols too. Okay, so we'll talk more about that in a minute. Just to wrap up now, GI health, and this is the whole point of us trying to take this on, is GI health is longevity, you know, and the real power of GI testing is not about relieving GI symptoms. It's about relieving what? Inflammation, relieving oxidative stress, improving mitochondrial function, even as we talked about with those new organisms they're screening for, even improving metabolic health. So, what if you had a way to reduce the risk of diabetes, cancer, cognitive decline, and heart attacks? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. That's what this does. Oxidative stress leads to lipid peroxidation and heart disease, atherosclerosis, right? If you're inflamed and full of all kinds of chemicals and stuff, you're much more likely to get all kinds of metabolic problems and immune problems. This is like a core workup, right? For all these different longevity programs that you may want to run on people. I don't think you can avoid fixing the gut if you're going to do a comprehensive longevity protocol. I really don't think you can. I don't think that's possible. Then the gut zoomer itself, we're talking about my favorite things, accurate lab data, you getting your interpretation skills up. You can join the Vibrant Academy and start to work on that. Applying all of this in a way, and I know I experienced this in 1995. Okay. Applying lab data in 1995 to my practice completely transformed everything that I did. It changed every result with every patient. And I never looked back. I became a complete lab aficionado after the very first GI test that I ran in 1995 because it changed. This patient, Nancy, she had this horrible ulcerative colitis problem and I didn't know what to do, and I had heard about these parasite tests. I ordered one. She had Entamoeba histolytica, treated it, and a month later, her ulcerative colitis was gone. It wasn't ulcerative colitis. She was misdiagnosed. She actually had an amoebic infection. I was like, wow, that changed that woman's life. And I just felt like if I didn't test everybody going forward, I wasn't really doing my job. Okay. So I'm a really strong advocate for that based on my personal experience and watching it impact the people around me and the patients around me and now the practitioners around me that I train. Okay. So adopt this into your practice, learn about the Vibrant Academy. We're going to talk about that more in a minute and make sure that you download the reports, you take the class, get some sample cases going and get yourself moving on the right direction. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Adair, and we'll have some questions after that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Kalish. That was amazing. Love all your stories. So, I'm now going to share how to join the Vibrant Academy, how to get access. So, all you need to do is sign into your Vibrant provider portal. So, for those who don't know how to get there, you go to vibrantwellness.com, you click sign in, provider login. That's where we redirect you to the provider sign in page, and then sign in with your email address and your password. And then once you're signed in, you go to the Education Center. So you can either enter through the Education Center link at the top or in the resources section down here. So either one will get you to the same place, and that will open the Education Center. And this is the same Education Center you've always known and loved with the folders for each test that you can search. But at the top is a new banner. So it says Precision Education for Precision Medicine, and you click on it to explore the Vibrant Academy. This will open in a new tab. And here is where you can access the course. So the first course we have is Mastering Gut Health in Clinical Practice. You click on View, and you simply click Enroll. It's that easy. Once you are enrolled in the course, you can start the course, or you could look at the course outline. So you could look at the welcome, module 1, the foundations of gut health. So talking about the gut brain axis, for example. You could jump ahead to module 2. Maybe you want an introduction to the gut zoomer, the science behind the gut zoomer. Maybe you want help interpreting actual parts of the report. So looking at the gut inflammatory markers, there's a whole section of that on the malabsorption markers, or coming down to case studies. So module 4 is all about clinical cases. Module 5 is about patient engagement and overcoming objectives. Objections when patients are like, but I don't know about this. This can help you get over those hurdles. And then number 6 is treatment protocols and recommendations. So if you want to jump ahead, you can do that, or you can start at the top, click start course, and it dives you right in. So each course will have a little information about that course. There'll be a video along with subtitles. And then once you complete the course, you can click continue to go to the next one. So you have all the information at your fingertips. All right. And now let me stop sharing and go over any question that we have. All right. So first question, Dan wants to know, is it called My Wellness? So it's called the Vibrant Academy. My Wellness is the patient portal, a patient login. Next question, Laura wants to know the cost. The Vibrant Academy is 100% free. And are there any other questions? Juliana wants to know, where do we find the Vibrant Academy again? So here we go. So you can sign in from the Vibrant Wellness website by going up to the top and saying sign in and choosing provider portal. So it does require you having being a Vibrant ordering provider. And if you want information about how to join, you can sign up by clicking the sign up here button, and that will walk you through how to become a Vibrant ordering provider today if you're interested. But if you already have an account, you sign in through that link, you hit continue to sign in. And then once you're in your Vibrant provider portal, you go to the Education Center. So either here or down here at the bottom, they both go to the same place. That opens the Education Center tab, and you click on Explore Vibrant Academy. Just click that banner, and voila, you have access to the Mastering Gut Health and Clinical Practice course. Great question from Natalie. Is there a way to have a previous Gut Zoomer updated with the new graphics information? So because there are new markers on this updated report, we are unable to recreate old reports because there will just be markers missing. So it is not possible to recreate old reports. Instead, the best option is just to order a new test to get the most up-to-date information with all those beautiful graphics and information that Dr. Kalish talked about. Claire wants to know, can we schedule consults with Vibrant clinicians to help with interpretation of results when we are doing this test? Absolutely. Yes. You can always schedule a consultation. Every session ID allows you for one consultation. You can do that through the provider portal as well. However, I highly encourage you to check out the Gut Zoomer course in the Vibrant Academy, self-paced learning, go at whatever speed you want. You can repeat the parts that you need more information about. You can listen to them at 0.5x or 2x, like whatever speed works for you. It's really a great way to learn at your own speed. Next question comes from Louise. Does Vibrant have a test package for all the tests that Dr. Kalish suggested, hormone, gut, neuropathogen? Yes, absolutely. There are test packages that are available, and I encourage you to reach out to your sales rep for more information about test bundles. This one is, if in order to become a practitioner, it requires an NPI number. That is correct. You need to have a national provider identification number, and you can apply for one with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. So just type in NPI number CMS, and that form will pop up, and or the website where you can apply for one. The question was if the Gut Zoomer, the updated Gut Zoomer will be available for purchase through WellPros, and the answer is yes. Yes, when you order the Gut Zoomer through a WellPro store, it will be the updated version. All right, that's all the questions. Any final thoughts before we end, Dr. Kalish?
Just thanks for putting this on. I'm excited to see what happens with the new test. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. Thank you, Dr. Kalish, for your amazing presentation.
You said,
And until
thank you.
next time, everyone, stay vibrant. This webinar is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you have heard here today.